The Freedom Riders is a topic commonly overlooked by most history classes, and to find information about them, you have to be looking for it. You won't find it by accident. My goal is to educate people about this topic, as it deserves to be talked about. The Freedom Riders were a group of students traveling around the South to try and desegregate bus terminals, but they faced violence and near-death experiences. This is A Bus Ride from Hell, the Freedom Riders story. The 1960s were a very progressive time for civil rights. There are many events from this era that are talked about a lot. Moments like the Martin Luther King Jr. speech and the Rosa Parks incident come to mind. One that isn't talked about as commonly was called the Freedom Riders. Our story starts in 1960. A lot of things happened this year. The Beatles were formed. The Art Deco style of the 1940s was slowly fading. Kennedy was elected president and his brother the Attorney General. The Supreme Court also made a decision that the segregation of interstate transportation was unconstitutional. By 1961, many places in the South were not too keen on complying with this order. So, the Congress of Racial Equality, otherwise known as CORE, decided to travel to the South on buses and attempt to use white-only restrooms, lunch counters, and waiting rooms. Volunteers were trained on how to deal with violence. This video is an example of the training that they were put through.
You nigger, you hear what that man said? You hear what that man said? You get back there, get back there. Get back. Excuse me. Hey, come on. Come on, get him back.
On May 4th, 1961, a group of 13 people, 7 black and 6 white, left Washington, D.C. They were riding on a Greyhound bus. They planned to reach New Orleans by May 17th. Their first stops in North Carolina and Virginia went well. It wasn't until May 12th when violence occurred. 2 of the riders were beaten when trying to enter a whites-only waiting area. The next day, when the group reached Atlanta, some of the riders split off into a Trailways bus. Little did they know what was about to happen the next day. The riders had gotten some press coverage, and news was spreading throughout the South. When the first bus reached Anniston, Alabama, they were greeted with a mob of 200 white citizens. These were all members of the KKK. So the bus driver kept driving past. The mob followed the bus in cars, and when the bus's tires blew out, someone threw a bomb into the bus. Everyone got out of the bus and was immediately beaten by the mob. Meanwhile, the other bus was arriving in Birmingham, Alabama, and was beaten by another mob. A lot of them were beaten with lead pipes. Bull Connor, the head of the police department, said that he knew the Freedom Riders were coming, but hadn't placed any officers nearby because it was Mother's Day. Both incidents were plastered on the front of every newspaper in the country. Things were not looking good for the Freedom Riders. What had started as a protest against oppression had quickly become a fight for survival. Because of these incidents, CORE struggled to find any driver who would be willing to drive the group, so the project was abandoned, and the people went home. However, this wasn't the end of the line for the Freedom Rides. Diane Nash organized a group of 10 college students from Tennessee to continue the rides. Robert F. Kennedy, the Attorney General, got a police escort and a driver for the rides in Alabama. So on May 20th, the rides continued. However, instead of being protected, the police abandoned the riders right before the Montgomery bus terminal, where another riot broke out, and 600 federal marshals were sent to break up the dispute. On May 24th, the group set off again, in Jacksonville, Mississippi. The rides were greeted by supporters, but those who had tried to enter the white-only waiting rooms were arrested and taken to jail. The same day, the Attorney General issued this statement, wishing for the riders to stop and give time for a cooling-off period. A very difficult condition exists now in the states of Mississippi and Alabama. Besides the groups of freedom riders traveling through these states, there are curiosity seekers, publicity seekers, and others who are seeking to serve their own causes, as well as many persons who are traveling because they must use interstate carriers to reach their destination. In this confused situation, there is an increasing possibility that innocent persons may be injured. A mob asks no questions. A cooling-off period is needed. It would be wise for those traveling through these two states to delay their trips until the present state of confusion and danger has passed and an atmosphere of reason and normalcy has been restored. During a court date for some of the riders, the judge turned to a wall. Instead of listening to the riders, they were sentenced to 30 days in prison. However, this decision was reversed by the Supreme Court. More rides continued over the next few months, but eventually the Interstate Commerce Commission put new regulations in place that desegregated bus terminals for good this time. And that was the end of the Freedom Riders. They had done what they had set out to do and had changed the world.